Corn School is brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Hi everybody, I'm Lana Reed. I'm the corn breeder for Agriculture Canada, located here in Ottawa.
Lana, what is that tiny little corn next to you?
Those are corn inbred lines. So that's one of the parents that are used to produce a hybrid, which is a cross between two inbreds.
So Agriculture Canada only breeds inbreds?
That's right, we only breed inbreds. We breed them for disease resistance, early maturity, rapid kernel dry down, and just adaptation to Canada. But before an inbred is released, it is tested several times at multi-locations to cross to another inbred to make sure that it will perform when it's part of a hybrid.
And so inbred lines are what would be provided to another breeding company that they would use to make a hybrid?
That's right.
Okay, so it's a parent.
Yes.
That's what that is. Okay. Now we are standing at the experimental farm here in Ottawa. Now we are, it's late September, and we're looking at Giberella as well as several other different nurseries. Is that correct?
Yes, this happens to be the Giberella screening nursery. So all of these plants were inoculated with Giberella Iran.
Okay, Lana, tell me, how do you actually inoculate these inbred lines?
So we grow up a spore suspension of the fungus in the lab. Then we put that spore suspension into some backpacks, put them on, come out. The backpack is attached to a syringe, and we inject the spore suspension into the silk channel of the cob when the silks are about 7 days old. So that's done in July.
Okay, and now this year, Giberella is showing up quite a bit. How important is it, or how effective, I guess, is the resistance that we have in some of our hybrid lines?
It really depends on the hybrid and the genetics that are used for it. We have a whole bunch of hybrids that we've screened here, and you can see that there's a lot of variation in their resistance level. The resistance that we've bred at Agriculture Canada into the inbreds is highly effective when that inbred is crossed to a susceptible inbred to produce a hybrid. You get very high levels of resistance.
And so, do we know if it's a multi-gene trait, the resistance? It is. We know that.
There are several genes involved, and there's some research being done here by Dr. Linda Harris, and she's been showing where some of these genes are located on the corn chromosomes.
So Giberella, of course, it looks hideous. It eats yields, but what is the danger of that Giberella infested grain ending up in a sample and potentially into livestock feed?
Obviously, the fungus produces a number of mycotoxins. One of the ones that we know the most about is called deoxynivalenol or DON or vomitoxin. So that's the one that we focus most of our efforts on when we're looking at this disease.
What happens if you feed DON-infested corn to livestock?
Depends on the species of livestock you're talking about, but there's a whole host of health issues that can happen. One of the major things, even with small levels of DON, is just takes longer to get say, a hog to a marketable weight.
Well, so last week at the LTech thing, what were some of the good questions that you got from farmers? What were they most curious about?
Most of them were curious about what it actually looks like in the field. So it was really nice for them to come into these fields, and we hadn't pulled back the husk yet. So we invited the farmers in that they could come and pull back some of the husks and see what the disease actually looked like. Before you pull back the husk, you can see sort of the pinkish mold, whitish mold on the husks, and the husks are tightly adhered to the cob. And then you pull it back and you can see how far that infection has spread from the tip of the cob.
Now, something I learned today, there are sort of those two entry points or two ways the disease enters the cob.
Yep.
Explain that to me. So there's top down and down and up.
Well, there's top down when the spores from the fungus land on the silk and germinate, and then they grow down the silk to infect the top. And you can see this ear hardly has any infection at all. It's one of our more resistant lines. Or the other way that the fungus gets in is it enters through wounds in the cob, anywhere in the cob, wounds created by birds or insects or even hail. And then the fungus gets in that way and it spreads through the cob. How fast the fungus spreads, whether it's coming from the tip or through a kernel. Depends on the environmental conditions, how they influence how fast the kernels are drying, because a dry kernel is much less susceptible than a young wet kernel. But the environment also influences the fungus and its ability to grow. It grows better at certain temperatures than others, which is why we see different strains of the fungus, different years, different species. And so it's a bit of a race as to how fast the fungus can grow and how fast the corn kernels can dry out, and that often determines how much infection you have, along with how much resistance is in there.
And one final point, what's the difference between Giberella and Fusarium?
Giberella ear rot is used to refer to infections by Fusarium graminearum, which is the same species that infects your wheat and causes head blight in wheat. Fusarium ear rot in the scientific literature is used more to describe infections by Fusarium verticillioides, which we don't see a lot of in Canada. It's more of a problem in hotter, drier areas in the US. And it infects the corn kernels with different fungi, or with different toxins, fumonisin toxins. So a whole new ball game.
All right, thank you so much, Lana.
Okay, you're welcome.